Magic Tree House. Fact Checker. Knights and Castles by Will Osborne and Mary Pope Osborne. Chapter 5. Festivals and Fairs. Some of the most exciting events on the manor were religious festivals and trade fairs. Religious festivals took place on holidays, such as Christmas and Easter. There were often feasts in the great hall. The Lord gave most of the workers on the manor the day off. Townspeople sometimes performed in the villages. They acted out stories from the Bible. The word holiday comes from the words holy day. Religion in everyday life. Religious worship was also an important part of everyday life during the Middle Ages. Most castles had their own chapels. The chapel was often the most beautiful room in the castle. Many chapels had stained glass windows, painted walls, and crosses made of gold. Kings and noblemen also gave money to build large churches called cathedrals. Some cathedrals were bigger than castles. Castles usually had their own priest, too. Each morning, the Lord and Lady prayed in the chapel with the priest. The priest said a blessing before every meal. He conducted weddings and other religious services. Most lords also built churches for the serfs who lived on their manors. Sometimes the lord and lady of the manor went on a religious pilgrimage. A pilgrimage is a trip to a holy place. People believed that making a pilgrimage would help them get to heaven when they died. Market days and trade fairs. Of course, not all gatherings on the manor were religious. There were also market days and trade fairs. Market days usually happened once a week. On market days, farmers and merchants set up stalls outside the castle gate. People on the manor came to buy food, clothes, and other goods. A merchant is a person who buys and sells goods. Trade fairs happened once or twice a year. At trade fairs, merchants from around the world came and set up tents. They sold everything, from candles and soaps to fancy daggers and swords. People from nearby villages sold pies and cakes and hot wine. Minstrels walked through the crowd, singing songs. Their songs often told stories of heroes and their adventures. There were even trained dogs and bears that would dance for pennies. A minstrel was a medieval singer and musician. Everyone on the manor looked forward to market days and trade fairs. On these days, they could take a break from their daily chores. They could shop, and they could gossip and share news with their neighbors and friends. Chapter 6. Knights. Medieval minstrels often sang songs that told stories of heroes and their adventures. The heroes were all very brave and bold and fair. The heroes were knights. Knights had different names in different countries. In Spain, they were called caballeros. In Germany, they were called ritters. In France, they were called chevaliers. All these words mean the same thing: horsemen. Knights were soldiers who fought on horseback. Becoming a knight. It took years of training to become a knight. It also took a lot of money. Horses and armor were very expensive, so most knights came from wealthy, noble families. Not fair. Only boys could become knights. A boy who wanted to be a knight started his training when he was about 7 years old. At that time, his parents sent him to live in another lord's castle. He became a page. A page served the lord's family their meals. He learned manners. He learned battle skills by fighting with wooden swords and riding on wooden horses. When a page was about 14, he became a squire. A squire was an apprentice to a knight. A squire took care of his knight's horses. He polished his knight's weapons and armor. If a knight were called to war, his squire went with him. A squire had to be ready to fight beside his knight on the battlefield. So, he practiced fighting with real swords and other weapons. Most important, he practiced his horsemanship. Horsemanship means horse riding skill. A squire had to learn to ride a horse without using his hands. On the battlefield, he would need both hands to hold his weapons and shield. Most squires became knights at about age 21. They were usually knighted at a dubbing ceremony. A squire could be dubbed or knighted by his father or by the knight who trained him. A squire from a very important family might even be dubbed by the king himself. At the dubbing ceremony, the new knight promised to be brave and loyal. He swore to protect his lord, his king, and his church. The Code of Chivalry. In the later Middle Ages, knights also promised to have good manners. They had to be fair to all people. They had to protect the weak. They had to be generous. They had to honor and respect women. These rules came to be called the Code of Chivalry. Chivalry comes from the French word cheval, which means horse. In real life, knights could be ruthless and cruel. But the minstrels' songs of heroes reminded them of the Code of Chivalry and how they had promised to behave. King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. During the Middle Ages, the most popular stories about knights were tales of King Arthur and his kingdom of Camelot. They were make-believe stories, but they may have been based on a real king who lived in Britain in the 6th century. One of the most famous stories about King Arthur is that of the sword in the stone. In the story, the people of Britain find a stone with a sword thrust into it. Writing on the sword says, "Whoever can pull the sword from this stone is the true king of Britain." A young page named Arthur is the only one who can pull the sword out of the stone. The person who put the sword in the stone was Merlin, a magician. After Arthur is crowned king, Merlin becomes his most trusted advisor. Merlin helps Arthur start the Knights of the Round Table. Arthur's knights gather at a table that is round so that each knight's place has the same worth. Two of the most famous Knights of the Round Table are Sir Lancelot and Sir Galahad. They both lived by the highest ideals of the Code of Chivalry. Two important women in the stories of King Arthur are Queen Guinevere and Morgan Le Fay. Guinevere is the beautiful wife of King Arthur. Morgan Le Fay is the half-sister of King Arthur. She learns magic skills from Merlin, such as how to fly and how to change her shape.